Have a seat.
Good afternoon. Can you introduce yourself to the jury?
My name is Anwan Carter,
And how old are you, Anna?
22,
Where do you live these days?
for the deals.
And were you here in town in 2016?
The courtroom was silent when he walked in. Anjuan Carter didn't look like the kind of man you'd cast as the monster in a horror movie. No wild eyes, no cold, eerie smile. Just a tired face, slumped shoulders, and the heavy, invisible weight of what he was about to say. He took the stand, raised his right hand, and swore to tell the truth. And then, in front of a jury, a grieving family, and the man prosecutors say orchestrated a brutal double murder, he started to talk. This is the story of how two teenage boys, 14-year-old Larry Ordway and 16-year-old Maurice Reese Gordon, went from hanging out at a Louisville apartment to being stabbed, dumped, and set on fire. And how one of the killers, now a confessed murderer himself, sat in a courtroom and relived that night in chilling, gut-wrenching detail. Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you're going to be asking yourself a hard question. Who is more terrifying, the man who wielded the knife, or the man who told everyone else what to do? The story begins long before the jury ever hears a word. Louisville, Kentucky, a city with bourbon, basketball, and a long, painful history of violence and racial tension simmering underneath everyday life. In 2016, in a rundown apartment building on River Park Drive, 4 young people were orbiting around one man, Brice Rhodes. Rhodes wasn't some mysterious stranger. He was older, controlling, and, according to prosecutors, dangerous. He liked power, he liked loyalty, and he liked having people around him who would do what he said. Among those people were 3 teenagers, brothers Larry and Maurice, and another young man, 15-year-old teen who had gotten involved in a robbery that went very, very wrong. That robbery, prosecutors say, is what set this nightmare in motion. According to the state, Rhodes believed Larry and Maurice could snitch, could tell police what they knew, and in his world, being labeled a snitch was a death sentence. But to really understand what happened, we need to go inside that apartment on the night everything changed. Before we do that, quick pause. If you care about cases where the system puts every detail under a microscope, where testimony, lies, loyalty, and fear collide, take a second to subscribe to the channel and hit the like button. It helps this kind of in-depth breakdown reach more people who want more than just headlines. All right, let's go back to that apartment. On the stand, Carter's voice was steady, but what he described was anything but. He said that on the night of May 21st, 2016, he was there in Rhodes's apartment with the brothers. They weren't strangers. They knew each other. This wasn't a random encounter in a dark alley. It was supposed to be a hangout. But somewhere in the middle of the night, the mood shifted. Rhodes, according to Carter, started talking about a problem. He believed Larry and Maurice knew too much. He believed they could connect him to an earlier shooting, one that left another teen, Christopher Jones, dead. And Rhodes could not afford witnesses. So, in that cramped apartment, Carter says a horrifying conversation unfolded. He remembers Rhodes talking about whether the boys should live or die. And then came the question that still hangs in the air like a ghost. According to Carter, the group started discussing killing the 2 boys, and when his turn came to speak, Carter says he told them, "I didn't want to kill them." Think about that for a second. Imagine being in a room where murder is being openly debated, like it's a puzzle to be solved. Imagine hearing your own voice saying no, and still staying in that room. Because here's the brutal reality, and Carter admits this under oath. Whatever doubts he had, he didn't leave. And what happened next is something the families of Larry and Maurice will never forget. According to prosecutors, once the decision was made, there was no turning back. Carter testified that Rhodes armed himself with a knife. The boys, Larry and Morris, were lured into a back bedroom. What they thought was a place to crash for the night became a trap. In the courtroom, Carter described flashes, sounds, pieces of memory that come in fragments, like a nightmare you only remember in pieces. He recalled Rhodes attacking, the boys being stabbed repeatedly. At one point, Carter said he saw one of the boys trying to fight back, trying to protect his brother. Two kids, 14 and 16, outmatched by a grown man with a blade and a rage that, if you believe the state, was fueled by paranoia and ego. It was chaotic, it was brutal, and by the time it was over, both Larry and Maurice were dead. But the horror didn't stop there, because according to the state, the plan wasn't just to kill them, it was to erase them. After the murders, Carter says he helped move the bodies. Let that sink in. The same man telling the jury, "I didn't want to kill them," also admitted that he carried their bodies out of that apartment. Their remains were taken to a vacant lot on River Park Drive, a place people drove past every day without knowing what would be found there. They were dumped, then someone set them on fire. When investigators eventually found Larry and Morris, their bodies were badly burned. The fire wasn't just about getting rid of evidence, it was about making sure these boys were unrecognizable, turning two lives into charred remains that would haunt their families forever. It's the kind of detail that prosecutors know sticks with jurors. The idea that someone not only killed two teenagers, but then lit their bodies on fire, is the kind of cruelty that can define an entire case. And in the middle of all that, you have Carter, confessed killer, accomplice, and now, star witness. So why was he on the stand at all? Simple. Deals. Carter and two other co-defendants had already pleaded guilty to charges connected to the murders. They were no longer fighting whether they were involved. They admitted it. In exchange for their cooperation, for testifying against Rhodes, they were hoping for something every defendant in a serious case wants: less time. Defense attorneys hate witnesses like this, and you can probably guess why. From their perspective, someone like Carter has every incentive to shape his story in a way that makes the main target, the man in the big chair, Brice Rhodes, look as guilty as possible. So when Carter took the stand, the defense went after him. Was he minimizing his own role? Was he exaggerating Rhodes's involvement? Was his "I didn't want to kill them" line an honest reflection of his conscience? Or a carefully rehearsed attempt to look less evil in front of 12 strangers? On cross-examination, the defense pressed him on the deals, the lies, the shifting stories. They reminded the jury, this man is a confessed murderer. His word alone can't be trusted. But prosecutors didn't rely on his word alone. They had other testimony, forensic evidence, burned bodies, patterns of behavior. They said all pointed to the same conclusion. Brice Rhodes wasn't just in the room. He was the one running the show. At the heart of this trial is something bigger than just who swung the knife. It's about how someone like Rhodes could pull people into his orbit and twist their sense of loyalty, fear, and identity until they were willing to do the unthinkable. Young men, already living close to the edge, suddenly faced with a choice that shouldn't even exist: help kill two teenagers you know, or risk becoming the next loose end. Carter's testimony forces us to confront an uncomfortable reality about accomplices. Sometimes, the people who stand in court and say, "I didn't want to do it," are telling the truth about that one tiny moment of hesitation. But they are also the ones who stayed. They are the ones who helped clean up. They are the ones who didn't walk out, didn't call the police, didn't knock on a neighbor's door for help. And the law has a brutal but necessary answer for that. If you stay and help, you're in it. Maybe not as the mastermind, maybe not as the one who planned it, but as a killer all the same. For the families of Larry and Maurice, no testimony will ever erase what happened. They lost 2 boys who should have had futures, graduations, relationships, inside jokes, kids of their own. Instead, they got phone calls no parent should ever get. They sat through autopsy reports, crime scene photos, and now, years later, they sit in a courtroom and listen to the man who helped take their children away, describe it in almost clinical detail. The sound of a voice saying, "I didn't want to kill them," doesn't bring their sons back. It just reminds them that someone could have stopped it, and didn't. If you've watched this far, I want to hear from you. What do you think about accomplice testimony in cases like this? Should someone like Carter, who helped move bodies and participated in the cover-up, ever get a deal in exchange for testifying? Or should every person involved in a crime this brutal face the maximum possible sentence? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, because this case isn't just about one night in one apartment. It's about how far people will go when fear, control, and violence collide, and how, in the end, the truth doesn't always come from the most innocent person in the room, but sometimes from the one who finally decides to talk. If you found this breakdown helpful and you want to see more deep dive coverage of real trials, witness testimony, and the stories behind the headlines, make sure you hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss what's coming next. And remember, some monsters hold the knife, others stand close enough to watch and say nothing. Both leave blood on their hands.